Welcome to Spooky History. Today we're talking about the Ghostbusters Court Case. No, not that one. In the holiday classic Nightmare on 34th Street, pretty sure it's Miracle, Oliver, childhood legend Freddy Krueger is put on trial and has to prove he is the mythical being he claims he is to avoid incarceration in a psychiatric hospital. I think we may be a little confused on a few things, but bear with me. Depending on whether you're watching the original or the remake, the court case ends with the judge ruling in favour of the existence of Father Christmas, either due to a technicality involving the US Post Office, or to the US motto on the currency which says, "In God we trust," establishing a precedence for government recognition of intangible supernatural powers. But that's just a film, and this is spooky history. So what if in real life you bought a house, realised it was haunted, and didn't want to live there and risk murdering your family? What would you do if your options were to live in a house everyone knows to be haunted, or prove in court there were actual ghosts in the house and that they were a problem for you? This was the question posed by Stambovsky versus Ackley, either known as the Haunted House Case or the Ghostbuster ruling. The house in question was, in fact, still is, an imposing Victorian house on Levetta Place, a dead end on the waterfront of the Hudson River in Nyack, New York. It was built in 1890, covers approximately 4,000 square feet, and was bought by George and Helen Ackley in the early 1960s. By 1990, Helen's husband was dead and she was living in the house with her grandchildren, daughter-in-law and future son-in-law Mark Kavanagh, when she decided to sell the house to Jeffrey and Patrice Stambovsky for $650,000. What Ackley and her real estate broker, Ellis Realty, failed to mention was that the house was haunted. According to Helen Ackley, there were at least 3 poltergeists in the residence, including a married couple apparently called Sir George and Lady Margaret, and a Navy lieutenant from the American Revolution. Helen claimed to have seen Sir George sitting in midair, watching me paint the ceiling in the living room, rocking back and forth. I was on an 8-foot stepladder. I asked if he approved of what we were doing to the house, if the colours were to his liking. He smiled and he nodded his head. Less peacefully, Helen's daughter, Cynthia, was apparently awoken every morning by the poltergeist shaking her bed, the only exception having been once during spring break, when she had loudly announced that she did not have to wake up early and would therefore like to sleep in, and the poltergeist had obliged, taking the next morning off. The family had also received gifts from the spirits, with the grandchildren getting rings, Helen's daughter-in-law coins, and Cynthia some silver sugar tongs, all of which suddenly disappeared later. Family members reportedly also heard phantom footsteps, slamming doors, and conversations in empty rooms, and Mark Kavanagh remembered one night when Sin had already fallen asleep and I was drifting. Then I heard the bedroom door creak and the floorboards squeak. My back was to the edge of the bed. Suddenly the edge of the bed by my midsection depressed down and I felt something lean against me. I went literally stone stiff. I was speechless and could hardly move. I was able to twist my neck around enough to see a womanly figure in a soft dress through the moonlight from the bay windows. I felt like she was looking straight at me. After about a minute, the presence got up and walked back out of the room. I finally relaxed enough to shake my wife out of sound sleep, acting like a toddler who had just had a nightmare. Had the Stambovskys been local, they would undoubtedly have known about these stories. The Ackleys, who weren't originally local either, had been warned by local children that the house, then vacant and in disrepair, was haunted when they bought it over 20 years earlier. Since then, the Ackleys had shared stories of the hauntings not only with their neighbours, but also several newspapers, including the May 1977 issue of Reader's Digest, and with 3 articles in a local newspaper between 77 and 89. For a time, the house was even included on a 5-home walking tour of the city. But when the Stambovskys finally found out, they had already made a $32,500 down payment on the house. They tried to back out of the contract, but the Ackleys refused to refund the deposit, resulting in the lawsuit. The New York Supreme Court, which is actually just a trial court, dismissed the action on April 9, 1990, but the Stambovskys appealed. Now you would expect the problem would be needing to prove the existence of the supernatural, as in Miracle on 34th Street, or yes, Ghostbusters 2.
Before we begin this trial, I want to make one thing very clear. The law does not recognize the existence of ghosts. I don't believe in them either.
Actually, the problem was that, at the time, New York adhered to property law doctrine of caveat emptor, which is Latin for let the buyer beware. It means the state imposes no duty on the seller to disclose any information concerning the premises, though they aren't allowed to actively hide information. The possible non-existence of ghosts wasn't a problem. In fact, the court accepted outright that the house was haunted as a matter of law, even though they said they didn't believe in ghosts. The distinction came at least partly because of the Reader's Digest article we mentioned earlier, Our Haunted House on the Hudson, written by Helen Ackley. At the end of that article was a little box that offered $3,000 for 2,500-word chronicles of original experiences in the field of psychic phenomena, which can be verified through witnesses and appropriate documentation. As Ackley had claimed in this and other articles this very thing and had been paid $3,000 because of it, the court decided that she couldn't now claim the house wasn't haunted, and so the house was indeed stigmatized property, the legal term for a haunted house, as the house's reputation was well established, at least partly thanks to the sellers, and since this affected the value of the property, the haunting was both pertinent to the case and incontrovertible. The Ackley's defence therefore claimed that ghosts were not a tangible enough reason to ignore caveat emptor, but the appellate court disagreed. They concluded that caveat emptor did not apply in this most unnatural bargain, as the most meticulous inspection and the search would not reveal the presence of poltergeists at the premises or unearth the property's ghoulish reputation in the community. They added that, if they agreed with the original judgment, then psychics or mediums would have to routinely accompany the structural engineers and plumbers on an inspection of every home before it was sold. They also referenced Hamlet, Who You Gonna Call from Ghostbusters, and made puns such as the plaintiff hasn't a ghost of a chance, I am moved by the spirit of equity, and pointed out that as the house was legally recognised as haunted, the seller had breached the agreement to deliver a vacant house to the buyer. The case generated considerable publicity, and within a week of the verdict, area real estate agents had between 25 and 50 potential buyers calling to buy the house, but only if it was, in fact, haunted. This, of course, couldn't be proved, and apparently after the ruling, both the ghosts and the owner announced that they were moving out together. They must have followed through on this plan, as there has been no paranormal activity reported by the 3 subsequent owners. Whether the house was haunted or not, Stambovsky versus Ackley was a landmark case which has since been cited in other rulings, is widely taught in local schools due to its uniqueness, and did affect the value of the house. Last time the house was sold in 2016, it went for $1,770,000, reportedly more than $6,000 above comparable homes in the area. I think we can all agree that the housing market as a whole is the real horror here. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Spooky History. You can find us on most social media at SpookyHistShow, and you can support us with donations at paypal.me/noisyghostend. If you have suggestions for future episodes, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching, and please do have nightmares. Goodbye.